The rain fell heavy over Seattle, drumming against the pavement and washing the streets in. Sheets of silver. At a dimly lit bus shelter near Pike Street, Larry stood hunched beneath his worn navy jacket, clutching a coffee-stained folder against his chest. Inside were 7 applications, 7 polite rejections. He exhaled slowly, watching the rain blur the streetlights into halos of gold. 43 years old. Former architect. Widower. Father. And now homeless. The words sat heavy in his chest, like the rain soaking through his boots. The digital clock on the bank across the street blinked 9:17 p.m. The bus was late again. Then through the downpour, a woman appeared. She looked to be in her mid-30s, dressed in business slacks and a blazer, no umbrella, no coat. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and she moved slowly, one hand pressed protectively against her rounded belly. Pregnant, maybe 5 or 6 months along. She stopped, beneath the same shelter, breathing hard, shivering. Larry tried not to stare, but her presence was striking, polished yet vulnerable, clearly struggling against the elements. She wrapped both arms around herself, trying to shield her stomach from the cold. He looked away. Just another night. Just another bus to nowhere. But then the wind cut through the shelter, and she flinched, curling inward over her belly. Larry glanced at her again. His jacket wasn't much, but it was something. He could keep it. Stay silent. Be like everyone else. But he didn't. Without a word, he shrugged off the coat. The cold bit immediately. He stepped toward her and held it out. "You don't have to do that," she said, startled. Larry gave her a tired smile. "I've already lost enough today. This coat, it's the only thing I have left to give." She hesitated, eyes moving between his face and her belly. "But you need it more than I do." Still, he gently draped it over her shoulders. "Not tonight. You're carrying someone more important than me." The warmth startled her. It smelled faintly of detergent and rain. She pulled it tighter, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, folding his arms against the cold. They stood in silence as the rain fell around them. After a moment, she turned to him. "What's your name?" "Larry. I'm Kelly." "Nice to meet you, Kelly." She glanced at him, then down at her belly. "You really shouldn't have given me your jacket." He smiled faintly. "Probably not. But I couldn't just let you freeze. Either of you." The low rumble of a bus broke the silence. Headlights cut through the rain as it pulled up. Kelly moved toward it, then turned back. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Larry shrugged. "Somewhere," he said, not explaining it was the back seat of a rusted Honda. Behind a closed-down grocery store. She reached into her purse and handed him a card. "In case you ever need anything." He took it, slipping it into his folder without looking. He didn't expect to use it. People said things like that all the time. Most didn't mean it. Kelly stepped onto the bus, glanced back once more, the coat wrapped around her like armor. Larry watched until the bus disappeared into the rain. Alone again, he stood shivering, not from the cold, but from something else. Something small, quiet, powerful. He looked up at the sky, then down at the empty street. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered, then turned and walked into the night. Larry walked slowly through the quiet back streets, rain soaking through his shirt. There was no need to hurry, no one waiting, no lights left on in a window. Just the cold familiarity of his car, parked behind an old grocery store on the edge of the city. He reached it just after 10. The old '02 Honda was rusted, the heater long dead. Inside the back seat was a nest of blankets, a pillow wedged in the corner, and a lunchbox tucked beneath the driver's seat. He climbed in, shut the door, and sat in silence. From the glove compartment, he pulled out a small metal tin and opened it. Inside was a faded photograph, his wife, Grace, smiling bright, and their daughter, Emma, around 8, with gap-toothed grin. "Good night, Grace," Larry whispered. "Good night, Emma." He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, letting memories wash over him. He had once been Larry Mitchell, architect. He designed things, libraries, community centers, parks. He had a wife who wrote poetry, laughed often, even when life was hard. Their daughter had her laugh, joyful and unfiltered. They weren't rich, but they were content. Then the accident came. A drunk driver on a rainy night, much like this one. Grace was gone. Instantly. Emma held on for 3 days before slipping away in the hospital. Larry left his firm to bury them both. Afterward, everything unraveled. Bills piled up. Savings drained. He sold the house, moved into smaller and smaller spaces until there was nothing left. But the car. Still, he tried to keep going. He turned job hunting into a mission, library visits into architecture, study sessions, a parking lot into his office. Every morning, he shaved in public restrooms, kept his shirt tucked in, his resume updated. "Why do you still dress up?" a shelter worker had once asked. Larry smiled. "Because I need to believe things can get better. And I need to look like I believe." That too. He worked whatever jobs he could find. Moving furniture, fixing leaks, sweeping construction sites. It wasn't enough, but it kept him alive. Tonight, sitting in his cold car, rubbing his arms for warmth, he thought of Kelly, the woman at the bus stop. How cold she'd looked. How surprised when he offered his coat. How she'd instinctively protected her belly. He didn't know why he'd done it. Maybe because she reminded him of Grace. Or maybe he just needed to feel like he could still do something good, that he was still the man who gave more than he took. Outside, the rain kept falling. Larry pulled a blanket over himself, leaned against the cold window, and shut his eyes. He didn't have much, but he still had himself. And for now, that would have to be enough. Kelly stepped into the warm lobby of her apartment building, the heat wrapping around her like a soft blanket. The doorman greeted her with a polite nod, but she barely acknowledged him. Her shoes squeaked softly on the marble floor as she made her way to the elevator, still wrapped tightly in the jacket the stranger had given her. She hadn't intended to take it. In fact, she had tried to refuse. But the man, Larry Heat, said, had insisted with a look in his eyes that quieted any further protest. Now, the jacket hung awkwardly on her, too large and threadbare, but warmer than anything she'd worn in months. She stepped into her penthouse apartment on the 24th floor and was immediately greeted by silence. No television, no music, no laughter, just the hum of modern appliances and the distant patter of rain through thick glass windows. Kelly dropped her purse on the entryway table and slowly peeled off the jacket. She was about to set it aside when her fingers brushed against something in the inner pocket. Curious, she reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, creased at the corners, smudged with fingerprints and time. She unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon. 2 stick figures stood hand in hand under a crooked rainbow. One was labeled Daddy, the other Emma. A small heart floated between them. At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "I love you forever, Daddy." Kelly stood frozen. She stared at the drawing, the words blurring before her eyes. A tremor ran through her, and she sank onto the edge of her couch, jacket still in one hand, the picture in the other. Her throat tightened. Emma. The name stuck in her mind like a thorn. The way Larry had held the folder. The tiredness in his eyes. The weight in his voice. It all made sense now. This wasn't just a man who had given her his coat. This was a father. A father who still carried a piece of his child close to his heart. A father who had nothing, yet still chose to give. She looked around her apartment. The place was immaculate. High ceilings, designer furniture, glass walls, not a single photo frame or personal touch. A space designed for success, not warmth. Kelly folded the drawing gently and placed it on her lap. Then, without thinking, she pulled the coat close and hugged it tightly to her chest. It still smelled faintly of something familiar. Maybe laundry detergent. Maybe memory. And suddenly, without warning, tears welled up in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years. Not really. Not since she was a little girl, cold and hungry, sitting on the steps of a shelter, hoping someone would notice her. That night, someone had. A man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. His name was Jude. He had taken off his jacket and wrapped it around Kelly's shoulders. He hadn't said much, just smiled and told her she'd be okay. It had been the first act of kindness she remembered, the first time she felt seen. She never saw Jude again, but that moment changed everything. Kelly sniffed and wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. She wasn't the same girl anymore. She had clawed her way out of the system, worked through college on scholarships and sheer determination, built Horizon Technologies from a single idea to one of the most influential tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. She had earned every dollar, every accolade. But somewhere along the way, she had forgotten what it meant to need, what it meant to give. Tonight, a stranger reminded her. She looked again at the drawing, at the shaky little heart between the stick figures, then at the coat in her arms, too big, too worn, but heavy with meaning. And she placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move inside her. For the first time in a very long time, Kelly Lawrence cried, not because she was broken, but because something inside her had been gently, beautifully cracked open. The next morning, Kelly sat at her desk, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, but her eyes were fixed on the crumpled drawing in her hand. The edges were worn now from being unfolded and folded again, as if she were trying to memorize every stroke of crayon. She had barely slept. She kept replaying the night before, the way Larry had offered his only coat without hesitation, the quiet dignity in his voice, the pain behind his tired smile. Something about him haunted her. Not just the kindness, but the sorrow he tried so hard to hide. She reached into the top drawer of her desk and pulled out a small silver bell. Moments later, her assistant, David, stepped in. "Yes, Miss Lawrence. I need you to help me find someone," Kelly said, her tone calm but firm. David blinked. "Of course. Who?" Kelly hesitated for a fraction of a second. "His name is Larry. I don't have a last name. He was at the Pike Street bus stop last night around 9. He gave me his jacket. I want to find him." David looked surprised, but he nodded. "I'll see what I can do." And David, this stays between us. Over the next few days, Kelly's instructions were carried out with quiet efficiency. Her team, used to locating elusive developers and post executives, now turned their skills toward piecing together the life of a man who lived in the shadows. They pulled traffic camera footage from the nearest intersections. Larry's figure appeared, briefly, blurred, bundled in his jacket. They traced the bus routes that stopped in that area. Around the time Kelly boarded, cross-referenced with entry logs, they narrowed down a handful of potential riders. None of them matched corporate databases. Finally, David returned with a thin folder. "His name is Larry Mitchell," he said. "He used to be an architect. No recent employment records. I found some online forum posts asking about job openings. He listed a contact number, linked to a prepaid phone. No permanent address." Kelly flipped through the pages. A copy of an old driver's license photo. A LinkedIn profile frozen in time. A scan of an architectural license that had long since expired. No arrest records. No scandals. Just absence. Kelly closed the folder. The silence in the room felt heavy. "Where is he now?" David shifted. "One of our guys spotted him yesterday near the industrial district in Soto. There's an old Honda parked behind a closed grocery store. He's been seen coming and going. Sleeping in it." Kelly stood. "I want to go there." David hesitated. "Kelly, are you sure? We could arrange for someone to approach him, or bring him here." "No," Kelly interrupted. "This isn't a meeting. It's personal." David said nothing, but his eyes softened. "I'll have someone drive you." An hour later, Kelly sat in the back seat of a black sedan as it wound its way through streets far removed from boardrooms and glass towers. They passed shuttered storefronts, graffiti-covered walls, and people who moved with heads down against the cold. The driver pulled up near the grocery store. Kelly saw it immediately, the old Honda tucked into the shadows. Rain from the night before had pooled around its tires. It looked like it hadn't moved in days. She stepped out into the chill. The air smelled like rust and damp concrete. Her heels crunched softly on the gravel as she walked slowly toward the car. Through the windshield, she could just make out a figure in the back seat. As she got closer, the door creaked open. Larry stepped out, blinking in the daylight. He looked at her with confusion at first, then recognition. His expression shifted, puzzlement, caution, then something like embarrassment. "Kelly," he said, his voice rough with sleep and surprise. She offered a small, uncertain smile. "Hi, Larry." He looked down at himself, at his wrinkled clothes, the rain-stained boots, the car behind him. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," she said simply. He frowned, crossing his arms. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. About the kind of person who gives his only coat to a stranger, to a pregnant stranger." Larry gave a bitter laugh. "You didn't have to track me down for that. A thank you card would have done the job." "It's not about thanks," she said. "It's about not letting something good disappear without being seen." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Two people from different worlds, brought together by an unlikely act in the bitter rain. Larry finally exhaled. "You came all this way just for that?" Kelly nodded. "Yes, and maybe something more." The next time Kelly saw Larry, he was bent over a stack of lumber at a construction site on the edge of Ballard. She had waited in her car for 20 minutes, watching from a distance as he moved steadily, silently, hauling, stacking, lifting in the cold drizzle with the quiet resolve of a man used to being overlooked. He wore a worn flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled to his forearms despite the chill, and his breath puffed out in visible clouds. His hands were calloused, nails dirty, but his movements were precise, efficient, purposeful. When he took his break and sat on a low wall with a plastic water bottle in hand, Kelly stepped out of the car and walked toward him. Larry looked up and did a double take. He stood quickly, brushing dust from his pants. "Kelly." "Hi again," she said, her smile small, genuine. "What are you doing here?" She handed him a cup of coffee she'd brought with her. "Thought you might like something warm." He took it hesitantly, his eyes searching hers. "You really didn't have to." "I know, but I wanted to." They stood in silence for a beat before she added, "Would you come with me? Just for a bit. I'd like to show you something." Larry looked down at his work boots, then back at the foreman in the distance. "I've still got a few hours on shift." "I already spoke to him," Kelly said. "Told him you had an interview." His brows raised. "I don't have an interview." "You do now," she replied. Larry let out a short laugh, more surprised than amused. "Okay, let's see what this is about." They drove in silence. Larry glanced out the window, fidgeting occasionally, conscious of his appearance, dusty jeans, rough hands, the faint trace of sweat on his collar. Kelly didn't seem to notice. When they arrived at Horizon Technologies' downtown headquarters, Larry hesitated in the marble-floored lobby, eyeing the massive glass walls, the polished chrome, the endless buzz of people in suits. "I don't belong here," he said under his breath. Kelly turned to him. "Just come upstairs." They entered a private conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline. Kelly offered him a seat, then closed the door and sat across from him. Larry cleared his throat. "So what's all this about?" "Returning the coat." Kelly shook her head. "No, this isn't about the coat. I kept that. It's mine now." Larry blinked. "Okay." She leaned forward. "I didn't come to thank you. I came because you made me remember something I forgot. A version of myself I had buried under years of boardrooms and deadlines. You reminded me that real change doesn't always start with innovation or strategy. Sometimes it starts with kindness." Larry looked down. "Kelly, I'm just a guy trying to survive. And that's exactly why I brought you here." She slid a folder across the table to him. Inside was a job proposal, a contract, a new position, Director of Human Connection and Values. Larry frowned as he flipped through the pages. "What is this?" "It's a new role. One I created. Someone who sits in on department decisions, training, programs, development discussions, not to talk numbers or strategy, but people, values, compassion. You'd share your experiences. Help shape the heart of this company." Larry laughed awkwardly, shaking his head. "Kelly, look at me. I don't have a degree in psychology. I didn't graduate from Stanford. I sleep in a car. You were an architect. I haven't built anything in years." "You built a moment I'll never forget," Kelly said softly. Larry looked away, overwhelmed. "This isn't charity," she continued. This is a role only you can fill. You know what it's like to be invisible, to be passed over. And yet you stopped in the rain and gave your only coat to a stranger, a pregnant stranger. That tells me more about leadership than any resume ever could. He opened his mouth, closed it, struggled for words. I'm not qualified, he said finally, voice low. Kelly leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. You don't need a degree to teach people how to care. You live it every day. You don't need credentials to teach people how to be kind. You've lived it. And that's more powerful than anything you'll ever put on paper. Larry's throat tightened. He stared down at the proposal, then back at her. And for the first time in years, he felt something flicker inside him. Not fear, not defeat, but hope. Raw, unfamiliar, terrifying hope. Larry sat alone on the bench outside the towering office building, the job proposal resting unread in his lap. His fingers ran along the edges of the folder, but his eyes stared off into the busy street, unfocused. He couldn't do it. It wasn't that he didn't want to. Somewhere deep down, he did. But fear gripped him tight and familiar, the kind that whispered cruel things late at night. She's just being nice. This isn't real. You'll mess it up. You always do. The offer felt like a trap wrapped in kindness. And Larry, who had spent years learning to distrust anything that seemed too good to be true, couldn't shake the weight of doubt. He didn't see Kelly step out of the building and walk toward him until she sat beside him in silence. You haven't opened it, she said softly. Larry gave a dry chuckle. Didn't think I needed to. I already know how this ends. How? Someone like me doesn't end up in a place like this. You don't build a company like Horizon by hiring people who sleep in cars. You think I made you an offer out of pity? I think I don't belong in your world. Kelly looked ahead for a moment, then stood. Come with me. Just for an hour. No suits. No meetings. Just trust me. Against his instincts, he stood. They drove in silence for over 30 minutes, away from the city's shining towers and into a quieter part of town. Finally, they pulled up in front of a modest brick building with a faded yellow awning. A painted sign read, Jude's Haven, a safe space for every child. Larry followed her inside. The walls were bright, covered in handprints, painted animals, quotes about kindness. The air smelled faintly of crayons and warm bread. Laughter echoed from down the hall. High, joyous, unfiltered children. Kelly led him past a community kitchen, a reading room, into a wide playroom filled with secondhand toys and handmade posters. Kids of all ages were sprawled across the floor, building puzzles, reading, playing. This place, Kelly said quietly, was named after the man who saved me. Larry looked at her. I grew up in foster homes. Bounced around. Some were kind. Some weren't. One night, I ran away. It was freezing. I was 13. I curled up outside a shelter, just waiting for morning. She paused. Her voice softened. He found me. A man named Jude. He gave me his jacket. Sat with me all night. Didn't ask questions. Just stayed. Larry didn't speak. He couldn't. I never saw him again, Kelly continued. But that moment, it was like someone reached into the darkness and said, You matter. I built this place because of him. She turned to face Larry fully. And last week, someone else gave me a coat. Didn't know who I was. Didn't ask for anything. Just gave. Larry swallowed hard. You remind me of him, she said. Not because of what you gave me, but because of who you are. They stood in silence, surrounded by the sounds of life and laughter. Larry's eyes wandered. Across the room, at the children playing, a volunteer tying a shoelace, a young girl reading. Aloud with too much energy. It felt warm. Real. Kelly touched his arm gently. I don't need you to fit in a boardroom, Larry. I need you to remind people of this, of what it means to care. Larry didn't respond. Not with words. His eyes were wet now. He looked down, trying to blink them away, but they came anyway. Quiet, unguarded tears. And then he nodded. Not for the job. Not for the salary or the title. But because for the first time in years, he felt it. He was still needed. Still useful. Still human. Larry stood motionless in the center of a room full of joy and laughter, a single tear trailing down his weathered face, not out of sadness, but from the profound relief of realizing he still mattered. Larry's first day at Horizon Technologies didn't start with fanfare. There was no welcome party, no press release, just a quiet meeting in a small glass-walled room on the 6th floor with a few skeptical department heads and a stack of sticky notes. Kelly had introduced him simply. "This is Larry Mitchell. He's here to help us build something more meaningful than just profit." The looks were polite but uncertain. But Larry didn't flinch. He began by sharing his story, not the sob version, not the headline-grabbing kind, just pieces, honest pieces, what it felt like to lose everything, to wake up in a freezing car, to walk into job interviews, knowing your shoes had holes, to choose kindness anyway. At first, they listened with cautious curiosity. By the end of that first week, they were leaning forward. Larry had a way of speaking that didn't preach or perform. He asked questions that made people pause. When was the last time you really looked someone in the eye? Do you know the name of the janitor who cleans this floor? What would you do if you saw someone crying in the break room? He didn't come in with charts or data. He came in with empathy. Slowly, a shift began. One by one, employees started seeking him out. First the interns, then junior developers, then department heads. Some came to talk about stress, others about burnout. A few came just to sit quietly during lunch. Larry listened. And when he spoke, he didn't offer solutions. He offered perspective. "You're not broken," he once told a young programmer who confessed he hadn't slept in 3 days. "You're just tired. Being tired doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've cared for too long without someone caring back." That line ended up taped to office doors, printed on mugs, quoted in all company emails. Kelly watched it all unfold from her corner office. She saw how breakroom chatter changed, how laughter returned, how productivity rose, not because of pressure, but because people felt seen. It wasn't long before Larry had an official space of his own, small, cozy, filled with plants, secondhand books, and a coffee pot that never seemed to empty. Outside of work, life began to rebuild in quiet, meaningful ways. With Kelly's help and a small housing stipend from the company, Larry was able to put a down payment on a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. It wasn't much, but it had a balcony, a kitchen table, and walls that didn't rattle in the wind. More importantly, it had room for visits. He started volunteering at Jude's Haven on weekends, helping with repairs, reading to the kids, teaching them to sketch buildings and bridges. As for Kelly, she and Larry saw each other nearly every day. At first, it was about work, meetings, strategies, collaboration. Then, without trying, it became more. They started eating lunch together, then walking to the parking garage together. Then weekend coffees turned into evenings spent watching old movies, talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It just happened. They were two people who had spent years building armor around themselves, only to find comfort in the quiet company of someone who didn't ask for anything but presence. One late afternoon, as they stood on the rooftop of the building, watching the sunset behind the mountains, Kelly said softly, "You've changed this place, Larry." He chuckled. "No, I just reminded them what they already knew." She looked at him. "You reminded me, too." Her hand rested on her belly, the baby kicking gently beneath her palm. Larry reached over and placed his hand beside hers, feeling the movement. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked. Kelly smiled. "Grace." Larry's breath caught. He looked at her, eyes glistening. "After someone important?" she asked gently. He nodded, unable to speak. Kelly leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then it's perfect." Larry had just finished a workshop on resilience when a young man lingered after everyone else had left. He looked no older than 23, skinny, pale, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "I just wanted to say something," he said, voice shaking. "Last month, I was going to quit. Everything. Life, I mean. I was done. But then I heard you speak. And it stopped me." Larry stood still, heart pounding. "You said something about how people don't need to be fixed. They just need to be heard." No one had ever said that to me before. It felt like someone finally saw me. The young man swallowed hard. If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd be here. Larry's chest tightened. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. I'm really glad you are. After the young man left, Larry sat down in his chair, the room suddenly quiet, the words echoing in his mind. He had once wondered if he'd ever matter again. Now he had his answer. The atrium of Horizon Technologies had never looked like this before. Gone were the banners of quarterly achievements and product launches. In their place hung soft white drapes, strings of warm lights, and a massive sign that read in elegant lettering, One Kindness Day. Employees stood shoulder to shoulder, dressed in their best, not for business, but for something far more meaningful. On the center stage, Kelly Lawrence stepped up to the podium, visibly pregnant now, her belly round beneath a flowing dress. Her eyes swept across the room. This day isn't about metrics, she began. It's about moments. The room quieted. A year ago, I was standing at a bus stop in the pouring rain, alone, tired, and more lost than I realized. And then a man I had never met did something no one else had that night. He gave me his coat. A murmur of recognition stirred through the crowd. Kelly smiled softly. It was old, worn, but it was everything. Because it reminded me that kindness, real kindness, doesn't wait until it's convenient. It shows up when the world least expects it. She turned to the easel beside her and removed the cloth draped over it. There, behind a glass frame, was the very same coat, frayed at the sleeves, faded from years of use, but preserved, like something sacred. Beneath it, engraved on a bronze plaque, read the words, One small act of kindness can rewrite a life. Kelly's voice wavered slightly. That act didn't just change my night. It changed the course of my life. And today, we honor not just that moment, but the man who made it possible. She turned toward the edge of the stage. Larry, will you come up here? Larry stood slowly from his seat, dressed in a simple suit, borrowed from a friend, but pressed with care. He made his way through the applause. His face, still lined with time and hardship, now carried something lighter, something peaceful. He stepped up beside her. Kelly reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. This belongs to you, she said. Larry opened it. Inside was the title deed to his apartment, stamped and official. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Kelly leaned in with a smile. No more sleeping in cars. The room erupted in applause once again, but Larry held up a hand. I actually have something, too, he said, reaching slowly into his jacket pocket. From it, he pulled out a small box, simple, worn, clearly held onto for some time. He looked at Kelly, heart pounding. You said this coat changed your life, but you changed mine. Gave me back my name, a home, hope, and something I never thought I'd have again, a reason to believe in tomorrow. He opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, not flashy, but shining quietly under the lights. I kept it, he said, voice trembling. Because if there's anything more valuable than this coat, it's you. He looked into her eyes. Kelly Lawrence, will you marry me? A beat of stillness. Then she laughed, a soft, choked, beautiful sound, and nodded through tears. Yes. Of course. Yes. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, cheers and claps bouncing off the high glass ceiling. 2 months later, they were married. The wedding wasn't held in a grand ballroom or a 5-star resort. It took place at Jude's Haven, the little brick community center that meant the world to them both. Children made paper flowers. The chairs didn't match. The cake was baked by one of the interns from Larry's mentorship program, but the room glowed with something money couldn't buy. Kelly wore a simple cream dress, her belly round and full. Larry wore that same suit. Volunteers, co-workers, people from shelters, and dozens of young employees who once sat in Larry's tiny office searching for purpose filled the seats. During the vows, Kelly held Larry's hands and looked into his eyes. Once, you gave me a coat, she said, her voice clear and sure. Tonight, I give you my whole life. Her words fell over the room like sunlight through a stained glass window, soft, radiant, unforgettable. Larry couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks as the crowd around them dabbed at their eyes. Laughter followed. Music played. The reception spilled out into the courtyard where children ran. Barefoot and strings of fairy lights danced in the twilight. Someone snapped a photo. Larry and Kelly stood beneath the sign of Jude's Haven, side by side, her hand on her belly, his arm around her. And beside them, on an easel, stood the old coat, silent, worn, and now immortalized. That image would go on to circulate online, shared, reposted, talked about. A symbol not just of second chances, but of how something as simple as kindness could reach into the cold and rewrite everything. 3 months later, baby Grace was born. Larry held her in the hospital room, tears streaming down his face as Kelly watched from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Kelly smiled. "She's ours." And in that moment, surrounded by love and hope and the gentle weight of new life, Larry understood something profound. Sometimes the smallest gesture, a coat, a smile, a kind word, can echo further than we ever imagine. He didn't have much when he met Kelly, but he gave what he could, and in return, he didn't just change her life. He found love, purpose, family, and a new beginning. Their story reminds us all, kindness doesn't require perfection, just presence, just heart. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that hope still lives in unexpected places, please like, share, and subscribe. Here we tell the tales that warm the heart, restore your faith in humanity, and remind us what truly matters. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing.